archaeologists first arrived at the site of Pella in 1979, they found a site virtually unknown and unexplored. Since those days, team after team of archaeologists have worked at the site. Their discoveries have brought to light the importance of the city as the excavations became one of the largest in the Middle East.
The investigations that we're undertaking in this archaeological project is very much part of a continuum in history from the, well, at Pella well over 1 million years ago when the first hominid groups wandered through the area, right through to the present day. And indeed, if one cares to look closely at the picture which emerges, it's evident that a lot of Western society of the present moment is just as dependent on this part of the world, if not more dependent on this part of the world for the origins of its technologies and its religious beliefs, as it is in the later Roman, Greek and European basis. It's very, very much part of a continuing living history.
Deep in Wadi Rum on the border with Saudi Arabia, ancient inscriptions have been carved on rocky outcrops. The people who inscribed these symbols may have vanished, but today a younger generation keep alive the traditions of their forefathers. Young men like Sayyid Abu Matik, a Hawatat Bedouin, who has made it his task to recall the desert songs of his people.
People refer to the land of Jordan as a timeless place. In many respects this is true. It is still possible to travel around this country and see lifestyles which have remained unchanged for hundreds, if not thousands of years. But this is only part of the story.
Today, as the citizens of Jordan go about their work, they're facing changes to their lives that would have been unimaginable even 50 years ago. For most of its history, Jordan, like its neighbors, has been ruled by outside empires. The last foreign power to rule Jordan was Britain. But in 1946, Jordan won independence, and since then it has taken its rightful place as a sovereign nation of the Middle East. With independence has come incredible changes as Jordan came to terms with her position in the region. Almost landlocked, without oil reserves or many natural resources, Jordan has developed into a stable nation, offering a safe haven for Arab investment in a turbulent region. Under the monarchy of King Hussein, Jordan has had to walk a tightrope between the Arab world and the West.
The battle of the future of this Arab nation, of the retention of the Arab identity, Arab freedom, the Arab right to live on Arab soil in dignity.
And they have not been easy times. Wars, waves of refugees, and political dissent have characterized the past. But they have also helped to transform modern Jordan into a politically moderate and reasonably affluent nation. These changes are easy to see as you go about the country today. But archaeological research has shown that cultural change has been a part of Jordanian life for thousands of years. An early discovery came in 1812 when the Swiss explorer Johann Burckhardt rode into the mountains of Wadi Musa in the south of Jordan. He was here to test his theory that these mountains hid the legendary city of Petra, a city carved from the rose-red sandstone of the mountains themselves. Braving the hostile glares of the local Bedouin, Burckhardt found his fabled city, the Nabatean capital of Petra. In doing so, Burckhardt was the first to show what archaeological treasures were to be found in Jordan. When the Nabateans, an Arab people, settled in the valley of Petra over 2,000 years ago, they were soon to build a city to rival those of Rome and Alexandria. The wealth to build such grand monuments came from the trade in precious frankincense, brought to Petra by camel caravan from the south, before heading to the markets of the Mediterranean. Nowhere else demonstrates the meeting of worlds as well as Petra. A local people with local gods and traditions, building stunning edifices in the style of Rome, the dominant power to the west. Further to the north, the spades of the archaeologists have revealed a magnificent city the Romans built for themselves, the city of Jerash. 2,000 years ago, the north of Jordan was part of the Roman Empire. And Jerash is a well-preserved example of the provincial capitals the Romans built across their empire. With temples to Zeus and Artemis, theatres and colonnaded boulevards, Jerash proclaims the influence of the outside on Jordan. But it was not a one-way flow. A local religion, Christianity, flourished in Jordan for centuries as it spread beyond the borders of the Middle East. For over 300 years, Jordan was an important province of the Christian kingdom of Byzantium, based in Istanbul. And churches with exquisite mosaics dotted the Jordanian landscape. In the year 635 AD, Jordan was swept along with the all-conquering forces of the Muslim armies. Christianity did not disappear, but Islam was now the dominant force, and Jordan's face turned to the east as Europe fractured into dozens of minor kingdoms. In the vain hope of rescuing what was lost, Europe sent the Crusaders to wrestle the Middle East away from the Muslims. At castles like Shobak, the Crusaders made their stand. And here they may well have remained, but for the rise of one of the greatest warriors of all time, Salah ad-Din, who was to doom the Crusaders' efforts in the Holy Land. In the early years of this century, new foreign powers saw the Middle East as vital to their interest. No longer was frankincense in demand. The world now wanted oil. As the First World War raged in Europe, Jordan became the lonely outpost of the struggle between the British and Ottoman empires. Capturing this fort on the Gulf of Aqaba was one of Lawrence of Arabia's most daring achievements in a long desert war, which was to see Britain enmeshed with the modern politics of the Middle East. In the west of Jordan is the great Rift Valley of the Jordan River, which cuts through the Middle East like a corridor. On the far side of the valley is Israel, now at peace with Jordan. But the valley remains a region of tension among some of the most beautiful country in the Middle East. The Jordan Valley has a rich history. People have lived here for perhaps 1 million years. In places, the stone tools which these very ancient people used have been here so long that nature has reclaimed them, and they are now firmly embedded within solid rock. In a land of deserts, the valley has the most important resource of all, water. A combination of the availability of water and the flat floor of the valley has made this region a crossroads of major civilizations for thousands of years. This valley has felt the influence of empires from the Mediterranean, Egypt, Syria, and Mesopotamia. Reflecting this long history is the site of Pella in the foothills in the north of the valley. From a distance, the main mound of Pella looks like an ordinary hill, but as you get closer, it becomes clear that the mound is a storehouse of human history. The water of Wadi Jirim has ensured a continuous occupation at Pella, spanning thousands of years. Hundreds of generations have lived here, each adding a little to the history of the site. One period on top of the other has slowly built up an artificial mound, known in the Middle East as a tell. In places, the tell is 15 meters deep, 15 meters of accumulated human debris. Although Pella never became a major centre of power, important work by archaeologists at the site have discovered that Pella has had a long and eventful history as it overlooked one of the busiest crossroads of the Middle East. From humble beginnings, Pella grew to be an important city. This tell has seen Egyptians, Israelites, Romans, Greeks, pagans, Christians and Muslims, as change after change has swept the region. To find out how Pella fitted into the mighty ebb and flow of history in this region, archaeologists from the University of Sydney in Australia have excavated the tell of Pella and surrounding areas for over 17 years.
Pella's a moderately sized city-state for this part of the world. It's been occupied for the best part of the last 8,000 years, probably continuously. Pella's a well-watered site. It's got a lot of arable land. It stands at the head of two major trade routes. So throughout the historic past, and very likely in the prehistoric past as well, it's been a site that's strategically important, as well as a site that occupies one of the more favourable environmental niches. From what we can tell from our trenches, which we've placed down along the south side of the slope, the occupation that we can now demonstrate to exist dates back at least to the middle of the 6th millennium BC. A series of trenches are in the Neolithic and Chalcolithic periods, another series in the early Bronze Age, some very large Middle Bronze Age fortifications have been uncovered in others. We have one or two trenches in the late Bronze Age and two deep soundings that have plumbed the sequence from the Hellenistic period right through into the natural soil.
A discovery to the north of Pella at Wadi Hama has given us a glimpse of the very early periods of human occupation in the region. Although the site was abandoned 12,000 years ago, the artifacts and architecture of the site are evidence of the first vital steps towards modern civilization. Only a metre beneath the surface, a sealed time capsule lay in wait for the archaeologists.
One of the main jobs of the archaeologist is to detect changes in human society. These changes might be cultural changes, changes in population, or changes in the material culture of a people, in such things as weapons or pottery. While we begin to think about change, a good place to begin is here. This village is over 12,000 years old. The people who lived in these houses lived at a time before the invention of pottery or metal, before the domestication of animals, and even before agriculture. However, when we dug in these houses, we found many implements such as this. It's a basalt grinding stone for grinding down the wild seeds which would have grown in the region. It shows us that the people were starting to turn their heads towards agriculture, and a series of rapid changes were about to overtake human society. And it's archaeology which can trace these changes through time.
To continue the story of human development in this region, you have to travel 3 kilometres to the south of Wadi Hama, back to the mound at Pella. As the trenches at Pella go deeper, they reach back into the past. Because of the depths of the deposits, it can take many years for a trench to reach the earliest levels. Although there are glimpses of earlier periods, What we do know is that Pella was first occupied over 8,000 years ago in the Neolithic period, when a small agricultural village was built above the spring on a low hill. With time, the village grew to be a considerable city. The length of occupation at Pella has caused the tell to resemble a giant layer cake, with one level on top of the other. As each civilization flourished, it added to the height of the tell, mostly by building mud brick houses which, when they collapse, decay back to clay from which they were made.
This house here is certainly not Middle or early Bronze Age. It's probably only about 50 years old, but there are strong similarities between this house and the ones that we dig up every day at Pella. The common thread that runs throughout it all is this. It's a simple building technique of mud bricks. You can see the tiny bits of straw that they've used to hold the bricks together, covering rough limestone blocks. Over time, if I can take a little bit of this off the wall here, the mud brick decays, crumbles, and falls to the ground. As it accumulates over thousands of years, it builds up a fascinating archaeological story.
In the past, without the luxury of modern machinery, it was easier to merely level out a fallen house and build a new one on top. Each time this happened, it raised the level of the tell. As this process continues, earlier levels are buried by later ones, and so, in most cases, the lower the level, the earlier the date. By the time you get to the middle of the tell's archaeological sequence, the deposits are some 4,000 years old. At this time, Pella was a prosperous centre with strong contacts with the dominant power of the region, Egypt. Guarded by city walls, her rulers lived in a grand residence overlooking the spring. In higher levels, the deposits date to around 1000 BC. At a time when the Israelite tribes were establishing a home for themselves across the Jordan River, Pella remained loyal to the local gods of the Canaanites. The massive stones of this wall may be part of the temple used during this period. As the levels get near the surface of the tell, their character changes once again. In 333 BC, the armies of Alexander the Great conquered the entire region, and deposits at Pella clearly show the influence of the Greeks. It is from this period that Pella received her name, after the birthplace of Alexander, Pella in Macedonia. On the very top of the tell are the remains of the Umayyad occupation at Pella. From 635 AD, Pella had become an Islamic town, and the Umayyads were the region's first Muslim government. For a while, the city continued to flourish under the Umayyads, until this settlement was destroyed by an earthquake in 747 AD. Close by the tell are other important areas. At the head of the spring stand the massive building programs of the Romans and the Byzantines, who ruled Pella in the years following the birth of Christ. The Romans built a small theatre and diverted the waters of the spring into a bathhouse, and the Byzantines crowned this with a magnificent Christian cathedral. It was during the Byzantine period, some 1,500 years ago, that Pella reached its peak. On hills overlooking the site, the Byzantines constructed more churches, and Pella became a major religious centre for the region. On top of the neighbouring hill of Tel Husn, further evidence of the vast sweep of history at Pella has come to light. In the lower levels of these excavations, massive constructions, earlier than the building of the Great Pyramids of Egypt, have been discovered. At higher levels, the Byzantines used this area as a fortress, probably to stable a cavalry unit. To the north of the main tell lie the clues for the latest chapter in Pella's history. After the disastrous earthquake of 747 AD, the city was rebuilt and was governed by a succession of Islamic dynasties. Shops and inns were erected, and the new city became the focus for passing traders. Over time, however, trade routes shifted and other cities rose to prominence, and Pella dwindled. For the past few hundred years, the city of Pella has slowly fallen into ruin, the only settlement on the site now being the village of Tabakat Far. But Pella is still a living centre. The very factors which attracted people to Pella in the first place, abundant water and fertile land, still draw people to the site. Living nearby are several families of nomadic Bedouin with their flocks of sheep, goat and camel. Their low-slung tents offer traditional hospitality and many glasses of sweet black tea. As elsewhere in Jordan, the lives of these families have changed recently, but the old way of life is still a source of pride and strength. During the winter and spring, the tents appear around Pella, and in a lush pasture the flocks graze. As the summer temperatures begin to rise, the Bedouin move up to the highlands, where altitude keeps the temperature moderate and food for the flocks can be found. There is no such escape for the inhabitants of the village of Tabakat Far. These people are largely farmers, although they may raise a few sheep and goats as well. They stay put, harvesting their crops in early summer and waiting for the winter rains to begin. Theirs is the village life, communities gathering in the cool of the day as people return from the fields. And so it has always been. Change and continuity, the nomads and the village, ways of life that have never changed. But you don't have to go far to find a thriving town that only a few years ago was a cluster of a dozen houses. This is the town of Masharia, on the floor of the valley, below the village of Tabakat Far. This town has grown rapidly in recent years as it absorbed many refugees and became a service centre for the area. It is a reminder of the recent changes within an ancient land.
In the end, however, why is it that we travel halfway around the world to dig up history in another people's land? Of course, there's many reasons for this. It's a shared history, just as important to the Jordanians as it is to us. Secondly, the changes that we detect in archaeology help us understand the changes that are sweeping our world today, both here in Masharia and back home. Thirdly, a common thread that binds it all together is an interest in humanity. How people lived in the past is just as important as how people live today. And it's through friends such as these people here that help us understand more about the past as well as the problems of the present, and help make what could be a fairly dull subject come alive.
Against this backdrop, the Australian archaeologists return each spring to Pella to continue their work of discovery on the Tell. For 4 months each year, the team live in the latest building on the Tell, the Dig House. Built in 1979 by the excavation's founder, Professor Basil Hennessy, the Dig House is home and office to around 15 core staff and a team of up to 20 paying volunteers who will assist the main core team and provide some of the vital funding required to continue the work here. It's a small Australian oasis set in a foreign land. Home base with an almost invisible line between work and recreation.
A little bit on the program for the morrow. The core staff start work.
Mealtime becomes a central focus, a break from the heat and dust, and the only real chance for the team to have a rest and discuss their work. Essentially, the team will divide into the field and house staff. In the field, each excavator will have their own area, supported by a volunteer assistant and a team of local workers. To process the finds coming in from the excavations, a number of archaeologists and other specialists remain at the Dig House, which, during the day, will resemble a laboratory. Each year, a new target is set. questions remain from previous years, and new ones will arise as the work progresses. The months ahead will be very demanding for the team.
You get up about 5:45 or so, and you have a cup of tea, and the workmen arrive at about 6ish and pick up all the tools. Abuisa checks them off, and they're usually in the trench at about 5:15 to 6:30. And then work really starts at 6:30, and it runs till 9 o'clock until breakfast, and that's really the most productive time of the day, when everybody's fresh and reasonably awake and things are happening. You get the most achieved in that time. And then breakfast is about 9 to 9:30, so you're back out here again at 9:30, and you run till about 12, which is Istraha, which is their prayer time. And then so 12:15 or thereabouts, you're back here and you're working until about 2. And that's the really hot time of the day. It's the really slow time of the day when you don't get very much done. So that's sort of the other end of the day.
This season will be devoted to excavating deposits which will increase our understanding of the early periods at Pella. Those periods which saw human society change once again from that of the village farmer, seen at Wadi Hama, to an urban dweller who lived in walled cities of considerable size. Towards this aim, the archaeologist might be excavating either in a large trench or in a sondage. A sondage is a small trench, often only a few meters square, which is designed to go deeply as quickly as possible.
Any archaeological strategy is going to be a compromise, because we don't have unlimited excavations and funding. We don't have unlimited time, certainly don't have unlimited resources. What we're trying to do with these very deep sondages is find out information on the major chronological periods on the site quickly. The catch with a sondage, of course, is that it gives you chronological information. It doesn't give you the contextual information. We're never going to know if it's inside a room, outside a room, in a street, in a bin. There's no way that we're going to be able to do better than that. In the big trenches, you're going to get a series of rooms, you're going to have streets, you're going to have entrances, you can say this is in a little room, this is in a big room. Wonderful information, providing you have unlimited resources. And even the very richest of the American excavations in the 20s and 30s went broke about 1/3 of the way through a tell site. And what you end up with, of course, is a lot of information on some periods and absolutely nothing on the earliest periods.
What we ended up finding in this sondage proved to be very interesting. We ended up with these massive mud brick fortifications. And from the pottery that we found associated with the different building phases of these fortifications, we could date them to the 19th century BC, the MB2A, which is the earliest phase of the Middle Bronze Age. Now, this proved to be very, very interesting because of the 7 sites within Jordan which have had Middle Bronze Age fortifications dug. These ones here at Pella predate them all by 200 years. They're 200 years older. We estimate that anywhere up to 3 million of these mud bricks were used to run 2 kilometres around the perimeter of the tell. So during this earliest phase of the Middle Bronze Age, Pella was a well-administered, well-centralised big city. So this is a really good example of how a sondage, even this small, can make a substantial contribution to a current topic of discussion in the big picture.
At some times, the work in the field can be delicate, and the preferred tool of the archaeologist is the trowel and brush. At other times, if the deposits allow it, a trench may resemble a construction zone. Throughout it all, the archaeologist must keep track of all aspects of their area, a task made more difficult by the fact that many of the local workers speak only Arabic.
Some of the men are new and some are old hands. Ultimately, I think that, yes, the men do know what we're about, what we're after. They do ask questions, and I try to relate to them as well as I can in broken Arabic what's going on. As to getting men to work, I think that that's a universal phenomenon that no one really likes to work too hard, and you do have to find a really difficult balance between pushing your men on and making them work, because we are here for a limited amount of time on a certain budget, but still keeping a good feeling within the trench and still maintaining those good friendships which you can develop.
At any one time during the season at Pella, up to 10 trenches and sondages were in operation, each with its own agenda, but all part of the overall strategy for the season. To obtain the maximum amount of information, the trenches were scattered across the Tell and surrounding areas. Beyond the spring of Wadi Jirim rise the steep sides of Tell Husn, or Mound of the Fortress. On this easily defendable natural hill, the inhabitants of Pella have had a secure base in times of trouble, and the path to the top remains long and steep.
We decided to work this year in this section of the Pella excavations on top of Tell Husn to try to answer one main question. Several years ago, people working up here uncovered these large stone platforms that you can see behind me. The pottery associated with these platforms told us that they were constructed sometime in the early Bronze Age, around the time of the building of the Great Pyramids in Egypt. But what were they used for? Were they the foundations for a large wall or the foundations for a large house? We had no idea. All we knew was that they were massively constructed of a very early date and worthy of further investigation.
Nothing so monumental had been seen at Pella before. The size of the platforms and the fact that each of these stones had to be carried to this place suggested a community effort. But why? The excavations began to the west of the platforms to find out what might be associated with them. Here a well-built retaining wall was excavated running parallel to the platforms. Between this wall and the platforms was a street. Its surface was still intact, and the archaeologists were the first people to walk on it in over 5,000 years. Further clues to the platform's function came not from this area, but from the trenches placed to the south. Here the archaeologists discovered what looks like a gateway, with a road running to the west and a gate to the south. It appears that the platforms were the foundations of a large wall, probably of mud brick and timber, which guarded the most accessible route to the summit. Tell Husn lives up to her name as the Mound of the Fortress, and these platforms make Pella one of the earliest fortified cities in Jordan. Archaeologists can work out such scenarios because close attention has been paid to the mainstay of the archaeologist's science, stratigraphy, the science of working out how each different layer relates to all the others. Once a sequence of layers are finalized, then the archaeologist is in a position to know which are earlier than others. But untangling the stratigraphy of a site is not a simple process, and each level can be extremely difficult to trace. It would be nice if each level was laid neatly, one on top of another, but pits, erosion gullies, foundation trenches for walls, and animal burrows all help to confuse the situation. If any sense is to be made of the stratigraphy, excavation must be carried out properly.
This section illustrates archaeological stratigraphy at its best. You have a series of white plaster floors running up to these large stone walls. The foundation trenches for these walls cut down through earlier deposits. As well, you have a series of small walls and a large pit that cuts through the deposits and an earlier phase of architecture. Now, the reason that you dig stratigraphically is to keep your deposits clean. If you dig the white plaster floors, you don't have to be Einstein to pick something that thick and white. Just about anyone will see it. You could crack through it with a big pick. You could dig it by moonlight. No problem. But if you don't pick the pit, and if you don't pick the foundation trenches, if you were to dig all of the strata underneath in little slices, what's going to happen is that you're going to mix all of these deposits. because these are earlier than that. And the latest deposit is all of this. So if you dig it all the way through, you get 3, if not 4 periods of archaeology hopelessly mixed up together.
One essential law of stratigraphy is that in most cases, the higher the level, the more recent the date. To obtain information from the lower levels, the higher levels must be removed first. Some say that archaeology is a bit like reading a book backwards and then tearing out the pages as you go. Archaeology, by its very nature, is destructive.
Well, this is a storage jar that's been sunk into a plaster-lined pit. We've dug a couple of these and we've never, no matter what technique we've used, been able to get them out in better condition than this, which is it's a very sad thing, but we've got photographs and drawings of the pot, and our conservator will be able to put it back together, believe it or not, so that the drawers in the house will be able to get a profile from it and actually draw a scale drawing of how big it was and what it would have been like. And I've also dug out the insides and taken archaeobotanical samples so that there was as much information as possible was gained from the actual vessel before it was destroyed, which is effectively what archaeology is. It's destruction in order to get information. So, although it's unfortunate, it is what has to happen.
Acutely aware of the destructive nature of their science, archaeologists take many precautions to ensure that a high degree of information is retained, long after a particular deposit may have disappeared. Typically, any feature of a trench is first recorded in the dig book, which chronicles the work day by day in a particular trench. Here, notes are made and sketch drawings are added for further reference. Next, the feature or object will be photographed, and a detailed plan will be drawn. Only then can the object be removed. The final safety net of the archaeologist is the drawing of the section or sides of the trench after it has been excavated.
What we're doing here is drawing the sections and one of the deep probes on the site. And we're after 2 things at once. We're interested in the archaeological stratigraphy, like these thick black floor lenses. As well as that, we're interested in estimating the level changes that the archaeologist, in this case the fair Catherine, has made in the trench. Because we're trying to work out 2 things. We're trying to work out what the archaeological stratigraphy looks like. And as well as that, we're trying to evaluate how well the excavator in question has picked those changes. Because these tags represent the levels as dug. And that means that all the pottery is going to come out in the levels as the excavator is dug. So that all the work that goes on in the house is dependent on the reliability of the levels as dug. We have 1 or 2 ways of checking that. The most important of them is drawing sections, tight measured sections, to centimetre scale.
From the field, all objects and samples are taken to the dig house for processing. These objects may be made from pottery or from glass, stone, alabaster, bone, or any number of materials. In the dig house, each artefact type is treated slightly differently. The smallest artefact type at Pella would undoubtedly be the archaeobotanical remains from the site. These remains are largely seeds, and while small, they're a vital aspect of any archaeologist's work. To capture something so tiny as a seed, an elaborate process is used. The soil being sampled for any possible seeds is first collected in the trench and placed in bags. These are then loaded aboard the dig's vehicle and taken to the spring for a process known as flotation. For a seed to have survived the centuries, it must first have been burnt. As it is now largely charcoal, the seed will float to the surface when the soil is placed in water. The seed samples are then collected and dried. From these small seeds, much can be learnt.
Well, archaeobotany is an attempt to reconstruct the economy and agricultural practices on a site and the local environment. And by looking at this material, we can attempt to reconstruct the gross economy, in other words, diet, things that were grown on the site, the way that agricultural products were distributed on site. And then on a more detailed scale, we can look at behavioural activities, things like crop processing and the handling of plants, things like winnowing and threshing. They produce recognisable patterns in the archaeobotanical record, and how these things change through time. And then on the other side, looking at the wild species, we can try and reconstruct the local environment around the site by reconstructing the parameters of plants, the ecological parameters of plants found on the site.
Another artefact type are the animal bone samples that are received from the trenches. From the smallest mice bones to the bones of the main food animals, these samples build a fascinating picture. They tell us much of the diet of the people, of the types of animals used, both domestic and wild, and of the environment. Here, the cataloguer, a veterinary surgeon, must identify types and relative numbers of species, and then relate this to the historical framework emerging from other work being done at Pella.
Excuse me, Rachel. Yep. I have a couple of little things here for you to look at. That?
Elsewhere in the dig house, the small finds cataloguer for Pella plays a pivotal part in processing many of the non-pottery artefacts unearthed each day. The variety of this material makes small finds cataloguing an involved job.
But then I'll take it down to Rachel and she'll tell me that's the bone and that's the seed.
Material needs to be first sorted and washed, a task that requires many hands to move through the sheer mass of material. Although this work is detailed, the rewards are that a complete picture emerges of all artefacts, even those that are small and appear uninteresting.
There's a whole lot of material found in excavation other than pottery, which has to be dealt with. We have a central register here where we record it all as it comes in from the field. It covers a whole range of types of different materials, such as animal bone, environmental samples, carbon samples, things made out of metal such as your coins, jewellery, architectural metal, to your flint tools, your groundstone tools, your pestles and your mortars, glass objects, a whole range of things. These all come in, get given a number after they've been cleaned, and they actually get identified here. And I have to basically work out, if I can, what the object is and what it was used for. If I can't do that, I just try and describe it as objectively as I can, so even if I don't know what the object is, perhaps somebody else after me will be able to tell what it was from my description of it.
By far the most numerous artefact class is that of pottery. After excavation in the field, these objects made of pottery, being reasonably tough, are washed lightly with water to remove any earth attached to them, so that the features of a particular piece can be more easily identified. At the end of the day, after the field work has ceased, each excavator sorts the pottery from their trench. This is to keep track of the periods that are being excavated and to do a preliminary sort into pieces to retain for further analysis, or those to be recorded briefly, then discarded. The pottery which is kept will allow the deposit to be dated and the technology of the pottery manufacturer to be studied.
What we do in the pottery type series room is catalogue all the pottery that comes off the mats. The ceramics of everyday life, the utilitarian wares, the cooking pots, the storage jars. It's going to give us some sort of an idea on the general change through time of the culture of the people that live here. Change is slow. Most of the periods of history here, change comes in 100-year dollops. And if you're lucky, you'll pick some of the few changes that we're going to see through the type series itself. The second thing we try and do is identify the imports. In other words, the foreign products that come here from outside. And what we're really hoping to find out there is some idea of the intellectual horizons. Most of what we're seeing is economic activity, but really what we're searching for is the horizons of the people that lived here through time. How much of the outside world did they know? Well, we can't know that, but we have indications of it.
Objects from both the pottery catalogue room and from the small finds cataloguer then make their way to other experts. Broken or dangerously corroded objects may need to go to conservation, where they will be repaired and stabilised. After having been in the soil for so long, many objects become unstable when exposed to air, and a major responsibility of archaeologists is to ensure that the act of excavation does not destroy an object. Most objects excavated will then be photographed to preserve a record of each individual piece. These photographs are processed on site so that the archaeologists are sure that proper records exist of each piece as soon as it has been excavated. The final step is that a team of illustrators will draw detailed scale drawings of all the major pieces. Although descriptions and photographs have been taken, there is no substitute for the trained eye to pick out small details that most photographs would miss. At the end of the season, just some of the many objects excavated have completed all stages of processing. Those that have are laid out to be inspected by the Jordanian Department of Antiquities, who decide whether the pieces are destined for a museum in Jordan or in Australia. But beyond these scientific endeavours, there is something else that motivates the archaeologists at Pella. The excavation is an experience for all sorts of reasons.
Many people imagine that most of the archaeological work in the old world has been done, but indeed it would be a minor part of 1% of sites which have been excavated or investigated. We're really only just beginning. And I suppose some of the major glories of the undertaking is that it's something which is never certain. Any archaeologist who's absolutely certain is almost certainly wrong. I think that's fairly basic. Each time someone puts a spade in the earth, a chapter or a paragraph or even a line has to be changed in one of our early written histories. I think it's remarkable that we've been able to write a general ancient history on the area, or indeed any area of the Earth's surface, on the little evidence which we do have. It's a healthy life, it's a good life, and one of the nicest things about it is there is sufficient interest amongst students and the young people to keep one's own interest from flagging. And one of the major undertakings of the Pella excavations has been as a trading ground for oncoming students. And we've done extremely well in the students we've passed through the University of Sydney in the past 15 or 20 years in this field.
It's a fantastic opportunity. Within 4 months you pick up infinite archaeological skills, and it's like an intensive course in all aspects of archaeology, practical aspects, intellectual aspects. There's a constant discussion with other students and your peers as to current debates going on within archaeological fields. And you just learn so much. You can't help but learn. You're constantly surrounded by archaeology, and it's just a fantastic experience, especially as I love archaeology anyway.
It's a passion, and if you don't have the passion, then you're not going to last, you're not going to survive. If you don't have a little of the passion, you're not going to get through first year at university. If you don't have the passion right at the soul of your heart, you're not going to get through the first degree. And then you come out here. You have to really love this place. You have to feel like it breathes inside of you as well. And it does for me.
I don't mind where I dig exactly, but it's always useful if you can dig in a period which is going to be more relevant, because quite often that digging this trench, for instance, might give me an opportunity to publish some of it, or it gives me first-hand knowledge of the pottery, it gives me much more hands-on kind of approach, and it makes what you do at home more relevant and more fun, because doing this stuff is the fun bit.
It's a great detective piece of trial and error, and that's the fascinating thing about it.
With this experience, the archaeologists at Pella do not see history as frozen in the past. They see it as an ever-expanding continuum with many twists and turns. It is a foolish person indeed who becomes deaf to the lessons of history in the belief that they have no effect on the future. There is a saying that goes, those who live in the past forfeit the present, but those who forget the past forfeit the future. After all, from the perspective of a future generation, today is the past. Just imagine how people will view our world, not in 50 years' time, but in 10,000 years' time. Some people say that because of film and other archival materials, there will be no need for archaeology in the future. But again, this is being short-sighted. It might hold true for the near future, but the immensity of time will ensure that even the best preserved records are lost. There is no doubt about this. It is the habit of all people to see their own time as somehow superior to previous generations. It now seems impossible for another dark age to sweep the world. But a Roman from the time of Christ would have also thought the same thing. Time will make fools of us all. Who knows what the future has in store? But an understanding of history makes it all a little less bewildering. So what will the archaeologists of tomorrow make of today's Tabakat farm? As they excavate the houses of this town, what will they learn? How deeply will future archaeologists have to dig to reach these artifacts? What will it tell archaeologists about today's world? Instead of pottery studies, will future work revolve around plastics? Indeed, will our time be remembered as a period of incredible change and of terrible waste? In the meantime, because of the landscape, the people and their cultures, and for the love of knowledge, the Australian team will return each spring to Pella to continue their work. The periods of interest may change and new trenches may be opened, but the excavation will continue. As it does, further missing links will be found, and our knowledge of this ancient provincial town will increase. With this information, the Jordanians will have another chapter added to their already extensive history. And we, as foreigners, will have a window through which to view our own heritage. With the same curiosity that drives people to wonder at distant galaxies, the Australian work at Pella also tempts us to look back to the past, back to the foundations of today's world.